Welcome to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast, where we help you in the LGBTQ plus community find a safe and affordable retirement place. Join Mark Goldstein as he interviews others who live in gay-friendly places around the globe. Learn about the climate, cost of living, healthcare, crime and safety, and more. Now, here's your host, Mark Goldstein.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Where Do Gays Retire podcast. And today we're going to go off the beaten path a little bit. We're not going to talk about a specific destination. Today I have two special guests, Michael Jensen and Brent Hartinger, and they are digital nomads. And the title of our episode today is The World is Your Home, Digital Nomads. I'll tell you a little bit about these two gentlemen. Brent Hartinger and Michael Jensen are a longtime couple who are both also writers. Brent is a screenwriter and novelist who wrote the gay teen classic Geography Club. And Michael is a novelist and editor who has co-founded the gay entertainment website After Elton, which was later sold to Viacom. In 2016, the night Donald Trump was elected, oh God, I remember that night. Brent and Michael decided to sell their house and travel the world. They left home in 2017 and have since lived for at least a month in 20 different countries and visited many more. Their chronicle and their weird and wonderful digital nomad lifestyle is their Substack newsletter, Brent and Michael Are Going Places. But at the same time, as they visit these places, they're thinking about where they eventually might want to settle down. Problem is, the more places they visit, the more complicated the decision becomes. Welcome, gentlemen, and it's a pleasure to have you and an honor to have you both here on the podcast. We've never done a session like this outside of the realm of a specific location, so I think this is going to definitely add value.
Well, thank you, Mark.
So welcome, guys.
Thank you. I've been a fan of Where Do Gays Retire on Facebook ever since I discovered it 2 years ago, and when you started this podcast, I thought it was a brilliant build out of what you've already done there.
And that was Michael, and this is Brent, and I agree. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So tell us your story. When that day when you decided to sell your home in 2017 in Seattle,
well, it's funny.
When Trump took office.
It's funny. We were at a election night party with our best friends who are a lesbian couple. We all thought we were there to celebrate the election of the first female president, but pretty clearly on, we discovered the evening was not going as expected. And about half hour in, we said, okay, we need to go. Our friends said, we understand. We're driving home in silence, and I'm feeling very depressed. And I'm not a particularly adventurous person, but I said out of the blue, I think we should sell the house and leave the country. And Michael sat on it for about 10 seconds, and then he said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And that was it.
But usually people, they say, okay, let's leave the country, and they have a destination in mind. Did you think about what you were going to do and where you were going to wind up? Or did you just say, did you at first say, I'm going to go to a specific location and then we'll take it from there?
No, we instantly wanted to become digital nomads, even though we didn't know what the concept even was. We knew we wanted to live in different places and travel around. No, we did not say, let's go to Mexico, let's go to Portugal. We said, let's sell the house and travel the world. And we didn't know exactly what that looked like. We didn't know if that meant staying in hotels or exactly how we would do it, but the plan was to continuously travel.
I think my memory is it was a little bit more nebulous than that we had this idea that we wanted to live in different cities. But at the same time, I don't think we knew, at the time, digital nomad was a thing, but we were not aware of it. But then as we started researching it, I think it was weird because it's like, oh, there's a word for what we're thinking of doing. These people are calling themselves digital nomads. They travel continuously. They work remotely. Maybe that's what we want to do.
I literally discovered that reading the New York Times travel section one Sunday, the term digital nomad, and I read what they did, and I turned to Brent and I said, I think this is what we want to do. I think this is what we are going to be doing.
But I do remember having big concerns about like the cost of living. I'm thinking to myself, gosh, I hope we can keep it as cheap as the cost of living in Seattle. Because, of course, I was comparing it to being on holiday or being on vacation, which is very expensive. And I didn't understand that, in fact, our costs have come in at about half or less what we were maintaining a life in Seattle. And I thought, well, are we going to be lonely? And we quickly discovered, oh, there's an existing nomad community, and we were sort of tapped into. And our social life is actually way more active now than it was when we were living in Seattle.
I find that so incredible. So on that day when it was time to leave your home, did you just sell everything?
We did. We did it in two stages. We sold the house. We told everybody what we were going to do. And I think people thought we were just blowing off steam. But 6 weeks after Trump was elected, we'd sold the house and we moved into an apartment in order to move our lives online. And we had to deal with Brent's dad, who wasn't quite ready for a retirement home. But we got rid of a bunch of stuff in that first move. And then when we were actually time to go, we got a storage locker, got rid of like a whole bunch more of the stuff we'd had in the apartment, put a bunch of stuff in the storage locker, locked it, and then went to the airport and headed out.
I think we thought it would take a lot longer than it did. It would be easy to do it in 6 months. We slated 12 months. It would be easy to do it in 6. I think you could do it in 2. But of course, my dad, who was elderly, needed help moving into assisted living and all of that. So it did take us, I was fine taking a year, but you could do it in 6 or 3.
Wow. So you just got rid of all your possessions and pretty much and just said, okay, you're on your way.
And I've heard about I've heard about like the simple living movement and all of that. And I've always thought, oh, what a bunch of bunk. That's so ridiculous. These people are crazy. It's so woo woo. But the reality is it's true. The more you simplify your life, the better you feel. It's really been incredibly liberating. And we like to say that our life has to be in balance because we carry our lives in a backpack. If our backpack is out of balance, we break our back. So you buy something new, you have to get rid of something old. But we have found it incredibly liberating not to be bogged down by all those material possessions.
This could be scary for some people, including me. Be honest with you. I don't know if I could actually do what you guys have done. What made you feel that you could accomplish it? Like just have no particular home base.
I don't think we knew that for sure. We said, let's give this a year. Let's give this a year and see what happens. And I've lived overseas before. I was a flight attendant in my younger days. So I'm a little bit more used to being itinerant than Brent was. I felt pretty confident I would take to it pretty easily. I was pretty worried about him. I thought he's got a great core, a group of friends he's known since elementary school that he gets together with. His family's still in Washington State. And I didn't know if he was going to take to it as well as he did, but he took to it amazingly. But we didn't know that ahead of time. It's a little bit like trying a new career. It's like you have to try it to see if you're going to like it.
One of the things that a lot of nomads do is they stay in something called co-living, which is sort of like an upper end hostel. Everybody has their own personal apartment, bedroom, and then there is a communal kitchen and communal living space. And our first stop, which was in Miami, Florida, we decided to stay. We sort of eased our way into the swimming pool and we stayed in the shallow end for the first 3 months to see what this nomadic lifestyle was like. And we stayed in co-living in it and we really loved it. We loved the community. We loved the sense of being part of a movement. That felt very clear very early on. And within a week, we looked at each other and said, this is the smartest thing we've ever done. We were both on the same page. And we knew almost instantly because it was such a great community and we felt so much better. Like I said, we felt liberated compared to our life back in Seattle, which in retrospect feels so overwhelming to me. It feels so stressful and overwhelming. I know people look at our life and think, oh, that sounds so stressful. You're comparing what you know, which is being on vacation. And our life is not being on vacation. We live in these places and our life is so much less stressful than it was just maintaining a house.
I was just going to ask you that too. So I was going to say, does this feel like a long vacation for you? Because you keep on visiting different places for different periods of time. And for me, that would be a vacation mode, like I'm going from place to place. So you don't feel that at all?
The only time we feel that is when we're moving between long-term destinations. We just spent 5 weeks in Novi Sad. We spent 6 days in Belgrade, and now we're here in Ohrid for a month. And those 6 days in Belgrade felt like, we don't call it vacation. We look at each other and we say, oh, we're touristing this week. And we actually have come to realize we don't like touristing. I don't like being in one spot for just a few days and trying to see a bunch of different places. it ends up feeling exhausting. And after like the second day, it's like, oh, there's that great museum. There's that cool castle. It becomes really hard to appreciate and absorb it. So we don't like touristing, but we also don't feel like we're on vacation when we're living in these places. And I think it's because we usually don't live in the most touristy part of town. I find a co-working place or a coffee shop to go work to. Brent usually works in the apartment. So we're doing our newsletter. Brent's working on screenplays. I might do some editing work. And then in the evenings, we go for a walk around town or down by the lake here. So we're living a regular life. Our life isn't that different than it was in Seattle in terms of the day-to-day things we do, except every 6 weeks or so, we're changing the location that we're doing those things in.
And just to be clear, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known where the names of those cities Michael just mentioned were either. We're in the Balkans, which is in Central and Eastern Europe. And so we were in Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We were in Split, Croatia. We were in Novi Sad and Belgrade, Serbia. Now we are in Ohrid, North Macedonia. And before, this was just sort of a blur, something about Yugoslavia, something about the Iron Curtain. And now I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the world. It's really interesting and also really beautiful. We love Eastern and Central Europe. But everywhere we go, we're rarely disappointed. Occasionally, we're disappointed by an Airbnb unit or a particular town. But there are so many beautiful parts of the world. And as Michael said, we tend to gravitate to second. When we're touristing in between destinations, we will go to Paris or Rome or London or whatever. We'll go to the big marquee areas. But we live in sort of the second and third tier cities, but they're not second or third tier in terms of beauty. They're often stunning. And because there are no tourists, the locals are incredibly hospitable. They're flattered that you've come to visit their community, and they're so welcoming. And so you can really make connections that you can't really make in a high tourist area.
So to back up just a little bit, the first place that you went was Miami, right? When you moved out of Seattle.
Correct. That wasn't the original.
And how long?
Go ahead, sorry.
How long did you stay there?
We were in Miami for 3 months, and that wasn't the original plan when we conceived this. We had a terrible winter in Seattle the year before we were going. We had 100 straight days of rain where we saw no sun, and I was just miserable. And that was when I read this New York Times article about digital nomads, and it talked about this co-living place in Miami called Roam, R-O-A-M. And when Brent got up in the morning, I said, I can't do another winter. Let's move up our plans and go to this place. And so we went there and we did it for 3 months.
Wow. So is 3 months the maximum stay?
Well,
or what is your schedule?
We call ourselves slow mads. So we usually stay between 1 and 3 months. The reality of the world, first of all, as Americans, I didn't know this before I left the country to travel the world. As Americans, you have something called passport privilege. You have massive privilege in every possible respect. But there's literally something called passport privilege, which is a term that describes the fact that Americans are welcome pretty much everywhere except for North Korea and Cuba and a few other places. They are welcomed with open arms. A lot of countries, I have a friend in Egypt, for example, and he can't travel to Western Europe except on a medical visa or a student visa. We can travel pretty much everywhere in the world on a vacation visa upon landing, which generally that's 3 months. Sometimes it's up to 6 months. In some places it's up to a year. So we are limited by the fact that most places, we do travel on tourist visas. So most places we can only stay 3 months, but that works well for us. We're sort of ready to move on after 3 months anyway. There is a big wrinkle in the fact that the European Union, most of the European Union belongs to something called the Schengen zone, which means you can enter. It's like a common border area, and you can enter, but you get one 90-day visa for the entire Schengen zone, and it can't be reset simply by leaving and then coming back in. You have to leave you're there for 90 days, and then you have to leave for 90 days, which is why we discovered Eastern and Central Europe in the first place, because much of Eastern and Central Europe is not part of the Schengen zone or the EU. We sort of, we have to leave after 3 months. Where do we go? And we went to Bulgaria and loved it, and went to Romania and loved it, and went to all these other places that we might not have discovered had it not been for the Schengen zone. We used to curse it. And now I think it's a great thing.
So out of the Schengen zone, so you still have the 90 days, right? But can you go out for like a day and then come back?
No, the Schengen is 90 days out of a 180-day period. So if you're in the Schengen zone for 90 days, you are out for 90 days. There's no reset.
No, how about outside?
Well, it depends on, I see.
Outside the
I see
Schengen zone.
question. It depends on the country. Bulgaria, visa on arrival, I believe it's 90 days. Romania, visa on arrival, 90 days. Here, it's visa on arrival, 90 days. I don't know the technicalities of each of those countries. We've never wanted to stay in one of those countries longer than that. So I don't know if you could go into Bulgaria for 90 days, leave for one, and then go back in. I suspect not. I suspect partly because a lot of these countries want to become part of the EU. They are aligning many of their policies with EU policies. So I would imagine that no, it's not one day in.
But I do think if this is your question, you can leave and then come back, and the total number is 90 days within a 180-day period. Other countries, the Republic of Georgia, they have a year-long visa on arrival. Mexico typically has a 6-month visa upon arrival, if you're an American, if you have this American passport privilege. But it's different everywhere, and some countries require that you get the visa. Thailand, for example, you need to get the visa in a consulate before you arrive. If you arrive, then the visa is limited. There are things that were a little discombobulating at first, but that's like anything. You figure it out pretty quickly.
Yep, absolutely. So how do you live without your quote unquote stuff? Did you just pack a few suitcases? What did you do with your stuff, and how do you deal with that?
Well,
you can't buy things and then travel with them?
Well, here's the thing. We did not consider ourselves to be materialistic people, but when we got rid of our house, we were shocked by how much stuff we had. And because we didn't know if this was going to work or not, we got rid of probably 80% of our stuff, but we kept 20% and put it in a storage locker. And that first winter, that first Christmas when we came back, we knew we were going to keep going. So we wanted to get rid of more stuff in the storage locker. And when we opened it, we were like, wait a minute, what the heck did we even leave in here? Because we just didn't remember what our stuff was. We realized in that first year how little stuff matters to us in particular. So we don't need that many things that aren't in the Airbnb.
We travel with backpacks. So we each have a backpack now, and our clothings are very functional. We have very utilitarian clothes. Everything is in the cloud. That took a while, but everything's moving into the cloud anyway. So all of everything, we don't really need documents. Taxes were a pain the first couple of years, but now I've got it figured out. Everything is in the cloud. We could lose our backpacks, and it wouldn't be that big a deal because we don't really have anything expensive or necessary. Basically, our laptops and our passports, that's pretty much the only thing we care about. Like I said, as Michael said, we were never particularly materialistic, but I found it extremely liberating. It is occasionally like, we'll be in the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul or something, and we'll see these fabulous Turkish lamps for $20 and think, oh my God, I wish we had a house that we could buy this. But they'll always be there. And if one day we do have a house, we'll go back to Istanbul and we'll buy the lamp.
We will very occasionally, there'll be something in the Airbnb we want. Like we like to have smoothies, so we can't always find a blender in your Airbnb. So we'll occasionally go out and buy a blender.
Yeah, blender. We believe that a blender makes life 20% better. So we prefer having a blender and a sharp knife and a carrot peeler. We travel with a carrot peeler and a garlic, certain essentials, a corkscrew.
There's certain things that you take for granted, like coffee. I need my coffee.
Oh, yes, but this has been fascinating. Every country has a different way to make coffee. There's mocha pots in Italy, and there's drip coffees in America, and there's Turkish coffee in Turkey, and there's Bosnian coffee in Bosnia. And so everybody has a different method. And it's been fascinating having to sort of make that mental leap and trying to decide what procedure results in the best coffee. And I'm not exactly sure. They're all like slightly or sometimes dramatically different. But I think that's fascinating. I love that.
To go back to your question about stuff, though, I feel like we've exchanged experiences for stuff. No, I do not have all of the comforts of home that we used to have, even though I can't remember exactly what those were. But what I do have is this endless variety of amazing experience and locations I get to explore. And I don't even think about the stuff because I've got all these other interesting things going on.
All for, I repeat, 1/2 or less the price. We could easily live even cheaper than we do if we wanted to. So in Seattle, we were spending about $80,000 a year. The first year came in at 40. Now we're at about 50. The price of Seattle would be a lot more expensive now. 100 or 120 would probably be the equivalent of what we were spending. And yet we live much more lavishly. We eat out way more often on $50,000 a year. That's just the reality. Because
I could imagine.
We spend half our time in cheaper countries like Mexico or Eastern Europe.
So how do you decide upon where to stay? Do you look for climate mostly? Like where you are now in Macedonia? I know you were in the region, but what fuels that idea of where you want to go next?
I think it's a combination of different things. It's a combination of places we've always wanted to see or things we hear about. Brent was really gung-ho to see Prague because he had read an article about something there that he really wanted to go and see. Budapest too. He really wanted to see Budapest because it's got all these geothermal features. And it's Budapest and Prague. Who doesn't want to see those? But climate definitely plays a part. We don't particularly want to go anywhere. We don't want to spend the winter anywhere that's especially cold.
Unless there's, like, we'll go somewhere for 2 weeks for the Christmas markets.
Right.
And then we'll leave. Otherwise, we're following the spring and summer.
And as I get older, I'm having a harder time with the heat. I don't want it to be too hot or too humid. So we do factor those in. We have become much more conscious of the environment the longer we travel. So there are, and I think nomads are getting better about this, but it used to not be unusual for digital nomads to spend a month or two in Europe and then want to go to Thailand because there's something going on there. So they'd fly down to Thailand.
Yeah.
And then from Thailand, they'd be like, oh, there's something in South America. So they zip all over. And we didn't really do that our first year even then, but we did fly a little bit more. Now we're trying to do things like we picked the Balkans and we haven't been flying around here. We've either taken trains or we've hired a couple drivers to move us around.
And the plan is to stay in areas for like the whole year.
So then you start looking more closely at those areas and ask questions. And we don't like the touristy areas. We don't want to be in Rome in August. I don't want to be anywhere. And I realize we are touristy and we are adding to the glut of people traveling to places. I am aware of that hypocrisy, if you want to call it that. But that being said, we look for, as Brent mentioned before, the second tier places, the places that most Americans haven't heard of, like Ohrid. There were, in 2019, 19,000 Americans visited Ohrid, or all of Macedonia, visited the entire country. And for us, that's a draw. It's like, I don't travel to hang out with a bunch of Americans. I love Americans. I'm happy to meet them, and some of our friends are Americans, but I don't go places in order to...
You want to get away from them.
Yeah.
Well, and we're also mindful of the phenomenon of over-tourism and how Airbnbs have driven up housing prices in a lot of cities. And so by going to these second and third tier cities, people are so enthusiastic. In Sarajevo, people were so humble and grateful that we were there. And it's like, let's have less. I think Italy would be fine with fewer tourists, frankly. But so many of these countries are genuinely poor. In Mexico, when we waited out COVID in Mexico, and it's a day economy, which means if you don't work that day, you don't eat that night. And when tourism evaporated overnight, that means a lot of people were not eating. And so a lot of people were saying, oh, tourism is imperialism, all of that. Well, having traveled the world and lived in all of these places and talked to all of these people, it's way more complicated than that. In Istanbul, literally, we had a good friend, a Turkish friend, who lost everything during COVID. And they were so grateful that people were coming back. And so I do think it is important to be mindful of all of these issues, but it's also important not to be knee-jerk, to understand these issues. So like the issue of gay boycotts is more complicated than they make it sound online.
One other big factor that influences our travel are our friends. Over the course of 5 years, we've made a lot of digital nomad friends, and we stay connected very tightly with them online, and we're all constantly discussing who's going to be going where and where do we want to meet up. As a matter of fact, from here, we're going back to Italy because 3 of our nomad friends are coming to Lake Como. And even though we were just in Lake Como,
that's great.
We're going to go back there to spend a week with them. So we frequently are coordinating with our friends to meet up with them.
I like to say we have nomad friends, we have local friends, but I like to say we could probably just stop. If we could stay in one place for a year, eventually everybody we've ever met would pass through town, which is awesome. There's always somebody. Like I said, we're far more active and social than we were back in Seattle. And it's partly because of the nomad community. It's really cool. I know a lot of people are critical online, but my reality, my sense is these people are generally pretty great, pretty awesome.
So being a gay couple, how do you decide to go to some of these countries that are not so gay friendly? So how do you choose that, and how do they react to you?
Well, everybody needs to decide these things for themselves. There are certain countries we would probably never go to, like Saudi Arabia. But our reality is, first of all, we're conventionally masculine and we can blend in if need be. And we are mindful of the local culture. We believe, I kind of feel like coming to a culture and acting according to your values and not the local values is a kind of American entitlement. So I think it is important to be respectful. We are guests in the places that we visit. You don't want to sacrifice your own dignity or your own principles, but within reason, it's important to be mindful of local mores. That said, we have found the world to be mostly very hospitable. It's complicated because we also get to know the local gay community, and usually they will be treated differently than people perceived to be rich Americans. We're going to be treated in a privileged way because we are perceived as Americans, even though we're gay. Whereas the local gay community, the oppression may be much stronger. If something happens to us, the authorities are going to take us more seriously because, again, we are privileged white Americans. But that said, the world is not the dangerous place. I'm not at all minimizing gay oppression because it's a real thing. But our experience is, if you do your due diligence, most cities are going to be mostly cosmopolitan. And I had so many stereotypes about, for example, Muslim people. And we've met so many awesome pro-gay Muslim people all over the world. Even in like Istanbul is a very cosmopolitan. I won't say it's pro-gay because they're sort of in the grip of an authoritarian government. But the people of Istanbul are just awesome. And for the most part are very tolerant. A lot of what you see, you're seeing headlines, and it's a headline because that's news, and that means it's unusual. We have found even more traditional people are very respectful. If you are respectful for them, they will be respectful for you. And a big part of Islam anyway is hospitality and respect. And there are just so many stereotypes that Americans have about the rest of the world, and most of the stereotypes are just wildly incorrect. Wildly wrong. Anyway, what do you have to say? It's a complicated topic.
Well, we actually have a term for what Brent just described, and we coined the term the weird foreigner rule. And the fact is, when we come into a country like Macedonia or Istanbul, we're foreigners, we're outsiders.
We're the weird foreigners.
Yeah, we're the weird foreigners.
Yep.
And so we are not part of their culture, and therefore we're already strange and weird. So if we're a gay couple, and if they even bother to think about it, they're just like, well, those are Americans.
We're already so weird.
Yeah.
So who cares if they're gay?
Yeah, they just don't register that. But part of the weird foreigner rule, as Brent mentioned, is the privilege that we're there spending money. We're bringing money into their homes sometimes if it's Airbnb, and it's in their interest to not care if we're gay. And so that works out really well for us. But part of what we do, we don't want to be breezing around the world using our privilege and saying, oh, we get to go to Turkey and not worry about being oppressed because we're weird foreigners and they're not going to do anything to us. So we always try and make a point to get to know the local gay community, and we try and write about it in our newsletter. We have an occasional column with LGBTQ Nation, which is a gay online news site. I think you frequently link to them or people on the site on Where Do Gays Retire Do. So I literally just wrote an article about what's happening with Budapest Pride and the protest that's there. So
Belgrade.
Sorry, Belgrade. Yeah, not Budapest, Belgrade. So we try and do our little bit to make the world a little bit better for the LGBTQ people who are living in the countries that we go to.
I will say, as I said before, everybody needs to decide these things for themselves and act according to their own conscience. But I have talked to literally hundreds of gay people in countries all over the world, and I say the same thing, even some very oppressed countries, and I say, do you think people should boycott your country? And literally 100% of people have said, no, that's the worst thing you can do. Unless there's like an organized boycott with a specific demand, these people are telling me, no, come to our country, be visible, and then talk about it in your own country and create international pressure on us to change things. And just disrupt stereotypes.
That's
and
interesting.
just talk about these issues and tell people what things are like here. And bring us into the international community. Don't ignore us. Don't shun us. Because by boycotting us, you're hurting the local gay business that's depending on gay dollars. And Americans have more gay dollars than anywhere else. So I confess I get frustrated when we've gotten a lot of flack. Oh, you went to Turkey? They're homophobic. How dare you? It's like way more complicated than people make it sound online. Again, I respect whatever choice people make.
That's a big topic.
Yes, I respect whatever choice people make, but I'm saying from my experience, I feel very comfortable. I feel like I'm making the world a better place by going there, talking about it, and then talking about it outside of this country. I don't have any qualms at all. And I also, for the most part, have not really feared for my safety. Most of these countries, for example, is the safest, literally the safest. It feels like the safest country we've ever visited.
Yeah, we've received flack, especially over Turkey, people saying things like, well, you're going there and you're putting money directly into the government's hand, and they're using that to oppress gay people. And I basically think there's pretty much no country in the world, well, there's very few countries in the world where you can't find some reason they're doing something that you probably shouldn't be approving of. I don't think Americans who didn't vote for Trump wanted the rest of the world saying, well, you're staying in America, therefore that means you're supporting Donald Trump and what he's doing, and your tax dollars are going to support the country. It's much more complicated than that. And if you make a little conscious effort to go to the liberal parts of a country like Istanbul and spend your money there, you're sure, maybe a little bit of that is trickling into the federal government of the Turkish government, but so much of it is going into the hands of local people and who get to know us, and we get to make an impression on them and change minds. As Brent said, I will happily go back to Turkey.
So much of the online discussion about digital nomading is, oh, it's so much American privilege, and these expats breeze in and they drive up the cost of living and they don't get to know the local community. In my experience, that isn't true at all. And I have to say, clearly you've hit upon a sore point for Michael and me, but I feel like nomading has changed my view of the rest of the world in a way that I didn't even think was possible, that I am so much more aware of American privilege. And I take all these issues very personally now because the people involved are my friends. I know gay people in Georgia. And then every time I read these headlines that I used to just gloss over, I'm like, oh my God, is Yorgi okay? Or is Aiko okay? All these people that I've personally gotten to know. And the idea that you just would wash your hands of that and say, oh, don't go to that country because they're homophobic is, to my mind, very simple-minded. It's way more complicated than that. But anyway.
So do you feel safe in these countries that you've visited so far?
I've never had a moment. The only time I haven't felt safe was when we encountered a group of sheepdogs in Bulgaria. We were out riding our bikes and came across these really aggressive sheepdogs. No, I have not. The world is so much, as Brent's already said, is so much safer than you think. When we lived in Miami, we were not in the best neighborhood. I don't want to disparage the neighborhood, but it was a neighborhood where we heard gunfire quite regularly. There was actually gunfire outside of our room one night. There was a gated lock at the co-living place, and there was shooting right outside. I felt much more unsafe in that situation than I have anywhere in Europe. And I've walked through what I would have thought 5 years ago as being some really dodgy neighborhoods. And now that I've traveled more, I look around these neighborhoods and I'm like, this isn't dodgy. This is poor. These are people without a lot of money, but they're no threat to me. They're not looking to rob me. They're just living their life in a way that is the best they can do.
But it is important to say, it is important to do one's due diligence and find out from local people, is this a safe place to go? And I also think it is important to be mindful of local mores and just don't do dumb things. If you're going to be out at night, don't necessarily get drunk. Be mindful. And I do worry that if something were to happen to us, and clearly we're a couple, are the authorities going to take our side, or are they going to take the side of the person that's causing us trouble? And I think that's a real concern in some of these countries.
Yep. How about guns? In most of the countries that you visited, are guns allowed?
Museums.
Yeah, I have not heard.
So all of the places, even in Eastern Europe?
Oh, Eastern Europe is very safe.
Yeah, I think you're allowed to have guns here a little more easily, but I haven't heard gunfire a single time. And even in Seattle, I heard gunshots. Not all the time, but I heard gunshots in Seattle. No, guns they're just not something anybody thinks about here.
Okay. How about, what happens if somebody has a health emergency? What do you do? What kind of insurance do you have? Since you don't really have a home country.
That's complicated.
What happens?
That's a long conversation, but in a very small nutshell. First of all, healthcare outside of the United States, it's far less expensive. So you could almost just pay out of pocket, since again, we're Americans and we have American salaries. We could almost just pay out of pocket. We do maintain both an American policy, an Obamacare policy for emergencies. If something really bad happened and we wanted to go home to recover from cancer. And then we also carry travel insurance for if any mishap happened on the road. We're probably going to segue to something called international health insurance in the years ahead, and then let our Obamacare policy finally lapse, which means we're covered wherever we are. But again, I can't emphasize enough how much cheaper healthcare is outside of America. We're talking like anywhere from 1/5 to 1/20th the price it would be in America. The rest of the world, America is insane when it comes to healthcare. I don't think I'm breaking any big news story. I think every American knows that. I guess I didn't really thought that when I lived in America. Leaving America and seeing how the rest of the world does healthcare, it's like, oh my God, it's even far crazier than I expected. But we write about this a lot on our blog. It's a complicated topic, but it's easily doable, especially as nomading becomes more popular. There are products that are being designed products. And in the years ahead, they're going to be even more.
And when we arrive in a new city, we make sure we know
Yes.
the emergency code, and we look up what is the best hospital that we should go to so that we have that information. I've literally got an email that says Ohrid hospitals. So if we did have an emergency, we would know where to go. We wouldn't just be figuring that out in the moment.
See, this is another...
Yeah, that's very important. And that's something to think about. I haven't thought about like going to different countries. Like I'm so used to calling 911.
Well, yeah, it's one.
Is it like different?
112 in
every
Europe.
country?
It's slightly different. Most regions have the same number, but and that's something you have to remember. It's funny, going back to the topic of American privilege, people think other countries, oh, well, the healthcare is so bad there, which may be true for the locals, but because Americans are rich, literally every country in the world, if there are any visitors at all, there's also a hospital that would be dedicated to rich Westerners. So literally wherever we are, even if the local healthcare sucks, there will be a, quote, expensive hospital that we could patronize that will be top quality care. But from our point of view, it'll be 1/10 the price of an American hospital. It really, the more we travel, the more I think the world is so unbelievably unfair that it is sometimes overwhelming at times. But on the other hand, it's great for us.
So I've noticed that some countries, if you're on their soil and you have an emergency, like you break your arm or something happens, you fall, they take care of you, I believe.
Oh, I don't think there's any
know how
country
true
that would deny you healthcare immediately. They would take care of you.
Except maybe America.
Yeah, except America. They're not going to take you to the hospital and say, can I see your insurance card? They're going to take you to the hospital, fix your arm, and then they're going to figure out what to do, what the charges are going to be. If it's something long-term, then that's a different conversation. But emergency-wise, no, nobody's going to turn you away from a hospital here.
I think they'll take care of
Just some dollar figures. Okay. I just had my teeth cleaned in Serbia. It was $25. And it was great, modern, completely modern in every way. I got glasses in Istanbul last year, frameless frames, and lenses were $100. I went to the emergency room in Thailand. That was $80. I was brushed by a bat. This happened to take place in the United States, and I needed the rabies vaccines. It's a series of 7 different shots.
Wow.
In America, that cost $6,500. That was partially covered. I had to pay $1,200, but I happened to have a nomad friend in Mexico who was bit by a dog at the same time. And in Mexico, it cost a total of $400. Her insurance paid most of that. Her travel insurance paid most of that. Just so for comparison purposes, what would cost $6,500 in the United States cost $400 and cost her $50 in Mexico.
And I believe it. You're talking about glasses, your lenses. And I remember going into places, in different places, and spending literally almost, don't look at me funny, but $1,000 on a pair of glasses it has the anti-glare and it has the...
Got all that for $100.
The works. For $100 compared to $1,000, that's unbelievable. All right. So how do you decide on which country you're going to? And is the cost of living really a factor, or do you kind of know in the back of your mind that it's going to be cheaper than what I'm used to in the United States, so it's good to go?
We alternate between more expensive and less expensive places. We are comfortable. We are not rich enough to be able to say we can go anywhere we want. So, for instance, by living in the Baltics for the past 4 months in these very inexpensive countries, this fall we're going to be able to go back to Italy, which is a little more expensive, but then we're going to be spending time in the Netherlands and Belgium and the United Kingdom. And so we do look at cost. We sort of look at over the cost of the whole year and average it out that way. So if we spend a month, we did spend a month in Switzerland a couple of years ago that was very expensive. And then after that, we went to Tbilisi, Georgia. So we can balance those out. As Brent said, our average yearly spend is about $50,000 right now.
I mean, one of the things, we're both artists, and so our income has always been very up and down and precarious. And it's been a good thing in a way because we save in good years, because there are always bad years. But one of the things I really like about nomading is we're not locked into one particular lifestyle cost. And if we had a bad year, we can go someplace really cheap. We haven't had a bad year lately, but if we did, we could go live somewhere for a year for $20,000 if need be. And like Michael said, we can average it out. So I love the flexibility. Here in Macedonia, for example, we just had a lovely dinner with a lakeside view, and it was $12? You could have a dinner with salad, entree, dessert, and wine, and it would cost probably $15 each. And it would be like a top restaurant with a view and great service and fantastic food. And the cost of living in the Balkans is ridiculously cheap.
I would suspect that. And about your housing situation, do you just go on Airbnb and choose a Airbnb, or do you a hostel, or what is your living situation?
Definitely not hostels.
Too old for that shit.
I did hostels in my 20s. I'm not doing hostels in my 50s. No, thank you. Pre-COVID, we tended to alternate between co-living, which is like what we started off with in Miami. We would do a co-living place in one location. In the next location, we might go through Airbnb. We might go through Booking. In Bulgaria, we went through a local agent. We just found somebody online.
Same thing with Istanbul.
Same thing with Istanbul. So it's a variety of different ways of doing it. Airbnb is really great and very convenient, but it's not the only way. You can do it on Facebook. You can join Facebook groups where people list apartments in different places.
Again, when you are outside of the major cities, people are very generous. In fact, at dinner tonight, a woman overheard us talking. He said, "Oh, you're from America?" And we said, "Yeah, we used to live in Seattle." And she said, "Well, if you don't have a place, I know somebody who can get you a really cheap apartment." So there are ways, especially if you're on the ground, there are ways. Airbnb has gotten more expensive in the last couple of years, as everybody knows, everybody's talking about. But there are still ways, and you travel in the off season, Airbnb will be 1/3 the price or 1/4 the price that it would have been in the summer. And so we tend to travel in shoulder season. We know, like in a high season, we're going to be in an inexpensive country. And then if we're going to a more expensive country, we'll go in the shoulder season or in the off season, and we'll get the same apartment for 1/4 the price. There are tricks that you learn. It sounds complicated, but it's not once you're actually living this lifestyle.
So at what age would you guys want to just settle down, or will you ever want to settle down? Are you going to decide on this is my settled place?
The age of death. We do talk about this, and it's in the back of our mind. And we have said we will travel until we find the perfect place.
Or if we get sick of it.
And is there a perfect place?
Good question.
Yeah, if there is, we haven't seen it yet. It's hard to imagine what that would be in terms of weather and cost and interesting things to do. We like to be active. We like to bike. We like places to go and hike. So that odds are we're probably not going to find one destination that has all of that. I think what we're going to do is we'll pick a region. We were talking about why Ohrid would not work as our retirement destination. And part of it is because it's so difficult to get to. And even when we do officially stop, we're going to want to keep traveling. We're going to want to continue to go places. And so doing that from a place like Spain, it's so much easier to get to the rest of Europe from Spain than it is from a place like here. So all of those things are factors.
But here's a future travel trend that hasn't quite hit the mainstream media. And it is that there is a new kind of living on the horizon, and it's basically a unit in a larger building where you could live there part-time and you have access to it doesn't even have a term for it yet, but you would buy a unit and then there is a mechanism that you could plug it into where you could rent it out while you're gone, and there's a communal area where everybody could work and live together. We have been tempted to buy projects like that in different places. So we spend 3 months in this place, and then when we're gone, the other 9 months of the year, they would rent it out because there would be like a rental facility, a rental component. And then maybe...
Sounds like a timeshare.
Well, yes, it's actual ownership, though. I guess it would be like a timeshare. And in the countries we're looking at, it's 1/20th the price.
Brent said something interesting earlier today as we were talking about getting ready for the podcast. And that is, as long as you don't have health issues that require you to have serious ongoing medical treatment, you can't, since this is Where Do Gays Retire, you can actually retire as nomads. You can get rid of your stuff and travel the world, quit your job, retire from your job, and then move around this way. There's nothing about retirement that says you have to pick one location. If that's what you want to do, that's great. If you want to find your one retirement home and stay there. But I do think, just like we think more people in general could do nomading that are doing it, I think more retired people could do it. And we have a lot of older friends than ourselves who are literally doing that very thing. They don't call themselves digital nomads because they're not working, but they're long-term travelers. They don't have a home. They just move from country to country traveling around. I have an older couple we're friends with. The husband just had a double knee replacement surgery in Turkey. So they're dealing with some of those issues we all have to deal with when we get older. They went to Turkey for 3 months, got his knees replaced, and now they're back on the road. They're both retired. Well, I guess he's technically not retired, but she's retired and they're traveling and seeing the world.
I hate giving up all of our secrets, and I hate encouraging people to do this because I don't want too many people to do it. So if you are intrigued by what we're saying in these, subscribe to our newsletter. But there is something else called the Foreign Earned Income Tax Exclusion Act, which means that if you're outside of America for 330 days, that means if you have residency somewhere else for 330 days, you don't pay income taxes. For a couple this year, it's $112,000. Next year, it's going to be up to $120,000. So you don't pay income taxes on that. But at the same time, if you don't have residency anywhere else for 180 days, typically, you don't have a tax event. If you're traveling on a tourist visa, you don't pay local taxes either. And this is all perfectly legal. And the fact is, we do make other contributions because if we don't want to be freeloaders, we donate to local food banks and stuff like that. But the reality is we don't pay income taxes, and it's perfectly legal. If you have residency in a country, and first of all, you have to get residency, which you have to buy a golden visa or whatever, and that can be expensive. Right. But you're also not paying, you're paying income tax. You're paying local income taxes, which can be considerably higher than they are in the United States. If you're a nomad, you're not paying income taxes. So it is kind of the ultimate life hack, I guess.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Cool. How do you travel to these countries without knowing the language?
Oh my gosh, Brent was...
Because I know for me, I'm like trying to learn Spanish for my trip to Spain and eventually hope maybe living there in my retirement years. So how do you like communicate with all these people from all different countries and in all different languages?
Well, Brent was talking about passport privilege before, and there's another privilege which I'm going to call language privilege, and that is increasingly, especially in Europe, I think this is less true in a place like South America and maybe countries in Asia, depending on where you're at. But in Europe, English is the second language wherever you go. I mean, here in Ohrid, which is a small country of less than 2 million people, almost everybody has some English. And the younger people all speak really great English. It's shocking how easy it is. We have tried, in fact, to learn Brent studying Spanish, and frequently when we're in Spain or a Spanish-speaking country, they won't want to speak Spanish, they'll want to speak English because they'll be practicing their English. In 5 years of travel, I do not think there's been more than 2 or 3 times where we've not been able to communicate easily with the person. And then you just take out your phone and use Google Translate, type in at the pharmacist, I need Imodium or something like that. And they'll read it and they'll go, oh, and they'll get it for you. We were worried about that when we left. We thought, oh, it's really going to be difficult not speaking other languages. I speak some Russian. Brent speaks. He's been studying Spanish. So we do have a little bit of facility. But in Tbilisi, Georgia, we do not speak any Georgian at all. And every tourist place we went to, every restaurant we went to, the co-working, the dentist office, people speak English. It's no longer, it used to be about catering to Americans, that you needed to know English because America's the big monkey on the block. But now they use it to communicate with each other. I was on a rafting trip in Mostar, and I was the only American. I was the only native English speaker. We had our Bosnian guide. There was a Dutch family of 3 from the Netherlands. There was a couple from Quebec in Canada, and there was a Polish man and an Albanian man. And everybody got in the raft, and nobody said to each other, what languages do you speak? Everybody started speaking English because they know that's how they talk to each other. The EU has brought them together, and part of that means they need to know how to speak to each other. And English was already there, and so English, it's so easy.
There's a fun fact about Switzerland. They have 4.
Oh, that's comforting.
Switzerland has 4 official languages: German, Italian, French, and then one I don't understand. But actually, the language that they all speak to each other is English. So that's not even an official language, but everybody in all 4 regions speaks English so they can communicate with each other rather than learn 3 other languages. Yeah, as Michael said, it really has become the language of the world.
Even in a country like Vietnam, we weren't living in exactly a rural place, but we were living in a much smaller town. And I do most of our shopping, and I try and do our shopping as local as possible. So I was at an outdoor market that was about as authentic as you could get. And I was talking with a Vietnamese woman who she didn't speak any English. English is less spoken there, but it's still spoken enough that a young person immediately stepped over and said, what are you trying to ask her? And I told him what I was looking for, and he turned to her and said, this is what he wants. And boom, I had my produce, whatever I was trying to buy, taken care of.
Really can't emphasize enough how welcoming and hospitable people are outside of tourist areas. And you wouldn't know that as a typical tourist because you would not go beyond the beaten track. But once you do, you realize people are really eager to meet people from outside their country. And they're smart to want to do that. That means they've got an open mind. They want to see more of the world. And people are so friendly and generous and hospitable, especially young people.
Yeah, I wish they were as hospitable in the U.S. towards immigrants, too, the way immigrants are more hospitable to everyone.
Is it not the truth? My favorite places, my favorite countries and cities in the world are Istanbul, Turkey, and Mexico City, Mexico. And what I love about both cities, the two cultures are different, but the thing they have in common is that they have these cultures that are just so hospitable and down to earth. They're just so approachable and down to earth, and they celebrate all the right things. But hospitality goes deep down into the core of both the Turkish and Mexican people. And they welcome you into their world in a way that Americans don't. Americans are, unfortunately, in a lot of places these days, they're suspicious and unwelcoming of the other, of people outside their country. And that just isn't true of much of the world.
Yeah, I'm more suspicious of our own people than outsiders. Anyway, on to a different subject. So you talk a lot about Lake Como in Italy. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What attracts you so much to Lake Como?
Well, we were actually never planning on going to Lake Como because it is one of those super popular A-list tourist destinations. But George Clooney's villa is there. But a digital nomad friend who we made our very first stop in Miami, Florida.
First nomad friend I ever made.
Yeah,
Literally the first.
He messaged us. We keep in touch with everybody we meet. And he said, oh, by the way, I'm in Lake Como. He's learning to fly. There's a great float plane school there. He said, I'm learning to fly there. If you guys are ever in the area, come visit. And we were like, oh, well, that's a good reason to go. We want to see him again. And sure, let's go check out Lake Como, even though it's super famous. And it was a good lesson because we went there with preconceptions about how touristy it was going to be, and that it was someplace that we wouldn't especially enjoy. And it turned out to be, it's one of those places that truly lives up to its reputation. It's stunningly beautiful. It was frankly more affordable than we expected, which was not surprising. It's still expensive.
We thought it was like Aspen, and Bellagio, which is a town on Lake Como, is like Aspen, but most of the area has maintained sort of that old world Italian charm. People who've been there 50 years might disagree with me, but the fact is, yeah, we really liked it.
I found it exceptionally beautiful. I was shocked at how much I loved it.
Were you there for 3 months?
That was just 1 month.
But then we're going back this fall.
We're going back this fall. Okay, I have to put that on my list. So if I move to Spain, all of these places I have to visit.
It's well worth it.
Yeah. So how do you make friends because of the length of time? You said that you have this expat, you have this digital nomad online presence and community.
Well, that helps.
How do you actually make friends?
Now that we're sort of public figures in the nomad community, people want to meet us. And so people will contact us. Before that, it really helped to do co-living, because when you're living with a bunch of other expats or nomads, you're sharing a living space. We like to say that kitchens are magical places. It's a wonderful way and place to meet people because there's no pressure at all. It's not like it's a cocktail party and you have to be charming. Everybody is there and you're just boiling an egg. And if you want to talk to people, you can. And if you don't want to talk to people, you can just boil your egg. But because the pressure is off, you can have really great casual conversations with people. And also you can share food. Oh, I made too much. Somebody else made too much. Why don't we, that looks really good. Oh, that looks good too. Why make soup together? There's all these opportunities for bonding, and you eat 1 to 3 times a day. So there's lots of opportunities. People are constantly coming and going, and there's just something very magical about food. Anyway, so we met a lot of our friends the first couple of years in co-living or in co-working. It's sort of the same. Some co-working facilities are dedicated to nomads too, and they have much more of a community. It's not just about the co-work. They do things at the end of the day. They do social events, and the same sort of vibe goes on. There's the workspace, and then there's a social space where you have your lunch, and it's very easy, no pressure to meet people. I think part of the problem, I don't know. I am a writer. When I lived in Seattle, it felt like, it felt like it was all about networking, like, how can this person help my career? And I also felt like I was always being judged by how successful is this person, and the degree to which they're successful is the degree to which I want to know them. And You remove all of that, which I find off-putting and frustrating, and then it is really just about, do I like this person? And it isn't about age, it isn't about looks, it isn't about race, it isn't about all of these things that are so important in so many other situations. It's just about literally, do I like this person? So we've ended up making a lot of really unlikely friends. I've totally drunk the Nomad Kool-Aid, and maybe I'm over-romanticizing things, but the fact is, it feels really magical to me. Obviously, there are jerks and assholes. There are people we don't connect with. It's not a flawless Star Trek world, but it's pretty darn close.
But it's so true also what you mentioned, I'm sorry, that in the U.S. too, it's like when you introduce yourself to somebody, you're like, okay, what do you do? That's like the first question, and that's the most important thing. What do you do? It's all based on what you do.
And with a nomad, it's more like, where have you been?
Other parts of the country, like what do you like?
Who are you?
Right. Who are you as a person, and not as, what.
Although we do make a calculation, I have sheepishly admitted to Michael at times that I make a calculation when you're doing co-living. People will come in and you'll say, well, how long are you here? And sometimes they'll say, 2 or 3 days. I'm just here for the week. And I will think, okay, not long enough for me. This person can't really ever be a friend, so I'm not going to go too deep. Whereas if they say, I'm here for a month, then it's like, okay. Well, this person can be a friend, therefore I'm going to commit a little bit more to seeing if there's any connection there.
So do you ever base your travels on where some of your connections are, like online connections? Like if people are in one country, you say, that sounds like a good place to visit.
Our digital nomad friends, yes, absolutely. We will arrange to meet them different places. We've also, as Brent mentioned, because of our presence on places like Where Do Gays Retire, there's another place called Senior Nomads, and our newsletter, which has been growing quite nicely. We have a higher profile now, and we're frequently having people getting in touch with us and saying, I see you're going to be, we're going to be in the Cinque Terre after Lake Como. And already one person has said, I'm going to be coming there for a few days. Can we meet up with you? And we're like, sure. And here in Ohrid, he saw we were here and said, oh my gosh, my good friend Karen is there. I think you guys would really hit it off. And so we're having dinner with Karen and her husband and her son on Tuesday. So if you're willing to make even a little bit of effort, put yourself out, make some connections, it's not that hard to meet people.
I'd like to say that in America, having dinner with people, like a dinner party or going out to dinner, is a big deal. In the rest of the world, sharing meals is not a big deal. Therefore, but ironically, it is a bigger deal because it's a more important part of the lifestyle. But because it's less of a big deal, you do it at the drop of a hat. There are sidewalk cafes everywhere, and everybody's always eating out. And it doesn't take much for us. Oh, yeah, sure, we'll meet you for dinner. And then if there's a connection, you can be there all night. You can be there for 4 or 5 hours. And that's very much a part of the culture, too. But if not, then you move on. But it doesn't take much for us to meet, even traveling somewhere to meet somebody. And the other thing, wherever we are, we've met so many people now that there are always people coming through, and they'll see on social media, you're in Macedonia? I'm going to be here too. And that's happened like in the last couple of months, it's happened at least 3 times. The people we know just happen to be here at the same time. So
that's cool. What would you say is your favorite place that you've been to? Is it Lake Como?
I probably get this question once a week, and it's a little bit like asking a parent to pick their favorite kid. And frankly, we've been so lucky to have been to so many amazing places. Almost every one of those places has something about them that I especially hold dear at this point. Wow. Like the beauty of Lake Como was amazing, but living in the Swiss Alps for a month and getting to look out at those Alps and the snow-capped peaks and go for the hiking was amazing. Discovering that Mexico City was an absolutely world-class city that I had sort of not even paid attention to my entire life was incredible. Southern Italy, we went to a place called Matera that we'd never heard of and discovered it's one of the oldest inhabited places in the world, and there's literally something there called the Stone City. So I can make a case for almost every place we've lived being somewhere that was especially in the top 5. But off the top of my head, I would say Grumman, Switzerland, Istanbul, Turkey, Mexico City, Mexico. I don't know. I'll leave it at those.
Living this way, it's funny when I think of the places, I think of the people as much as I do the place, both the local friends we met and the people we met there. And we spent 3 months in Tbilisi, Georgia, which is in the way eastern part of Europe, next to Asia. And we had planned to rendezvous with 2 nomad friends that we had met the year before, 2 young women. And so we spent 3 absolutely magical months exploring that city. And we went into Armenia, which is the country next door. And Tbilisi is a fantastic city anyway. But we just had so many wonderful times. We had dinner together. That's the other thing. Because eating out is not that big a deal. It's actually a big deal or not that big a deal. We would have dinner tonight. We'd have dinner 5 nights a week together. There's no, even though you had dinner last night, they're not shy to say, oh, let's get dinner. There's this other restaurant. And the cost of living is so cheap for Americans that it is often as cheap or cheaper to eat in a restaurant than it is to buy groceries and cook our own dinners. It's about the people and the relationships and things we did in these different places as much as the actual locations themselves.
Totally understand that. Do you go back to the U.S. periodically to visit family and friends?
We do. For the first several years, we were making a point to go back at Christmas, specifically to see Brent's dad, because Brent's got a brother who's there and sees his dad frequently. But other than that, it's a pretty small family. So we would go back at Christmas. Brent's dad is now older and isn't...
COVID.
Yeah, it messed things up. It made it difficult to go back. And now, unfortunately, he's suffering from dementia. So we don't make a point to go back at Christmas anymore. But we do go back once a year. We've got really good friends and families still there that we don't want to lose touch with. So we go visit them, and then we encourage them to come visit us wherever we happen.
Which they're starting to do the last year. Many of our normie friends are joining us on the road, which is great. But it's funny. I mentioned the foreign earned income tax exclusion thing, and you say to yourself, oh, you can't put a price on friendship. I would pay any price to spend time with your friends. But now that if we go back to the United States for more than 35 days in a calendar year, well, then it's going to cost us anywhere between $10,000, $20,000. So in a way, we are putting a price on our friendships. And so we are somewhat torn. We don't want to be in the United States more than 35 days a year. But fortunately, our friends are now coming and joining us in different cities, our American friends. But yes, we make a point to go back at least once a year.
That's great. So let's say you did settle down. Would you settle down in Mexico, do you think, or Europe? Is there any
pros and cons?
Particular place at this point you would think about?
Honestly, here in Lake Ohrid, North Macedonia, it is one of, between the cost of living and the beauty and the culture, I can see living here.
It's too cold in winter.
Maybe too cold in winter, yeah. But I think we could, if we had to settle down, we're not going to move back to the United States. We both know that. But it could be Italy, it could be Spain, it could be Portugal. Portugal is typically considered, the climate is great and has the best for Americans, one of the better retirement places. Visa situations. I love Mexico, maybe somewhere in Central or South America, maybe.
If you put a gun to my head right now, what an American thing to say. If you forced me to choose right now, I would pick Italy. Italy would be the country I would pick just because geographically it's so large. It stretches all the way up to Switzerland, so you've got beautiful mountains up there, and then all the way down to Sicily and Sardinia. So you've got this wide range. I love the Italian people. I love the Italian culture. I feel very comfortable there. So that is the place I would pick at this moment in time.
But as I'm sure your listeners are well aware, it's complicated because you have to weigh cost of living, you have to weigh the culture, you have to weigh political stability. How stable is the country?
Yes.
What are the taxes like? What's the healthcare situation like? What is the culture? Do you speak the language? What do you think of the cuisine? There are all these things you have to weigh, and you have to place value on things you find important. There's nothing is perfect in life. Nothing is going to have absolutely everything.
Exactly.
And it's partly, I think, before people just move to Portugal, I would say, well, why don't you travel for 2 years? Because you might find, as much as people say they love Portugal, there could be another place you like even more. That would be...
You might like Spain.
Or
France.
Someplace in Eastern or Central Europe, or someplace in Central or South America, or someplace in Southeast Asia. Who knows?
Okay. Very good, guys. Where can we find you on social media?
Our biggest place is our Substack newsletter, Brent and Michael Are Going Places. I'm very active on Facebook. I'm normally on Where Do Gays Retire quite frequently, but Facebook has seemed to throw me in jail a lot as late for reasons that make no sense whatsoever. I am not spamming anybody, so I'm on Where Do Gays Travel frequently. I run a couple of different Facebook groups. We're all going places and taking pictures where I encourage people to come and share their photos. We run another Facebook group called Travel Pitfalls, Hacks, Tips, and More, where people can ask questions. We do Twitter, Brent and Michael Are Going Places. We used to do Instagram a lot, but ever since they tried to start turning into TikTok, we're not there as much.
Start with Substack. Brent and Michael Are Going Places
that's
on Substack. That has links to all this other stuff too.
Okay. Is there a URL that we could, that we could?
Just Google Brent and Michael are going places Substack because I think it's
literally Brent and Michael are going places /Substack.
I think it's the other way around. Substack.com/Brent and Michael. Okay. I don't know.
We'll find it.
Yes, you'll find it.
We'll find it and put it in the show notes. All right, guys, is there anything else? Thank you so much. This was great. It was so interesting in learning how you guys live as digital nomads.
Well, thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to
I'll just
add?
say, if anybody is curious, anybody on Where Do Gays Retire, if anybody is curious about this, has something we didn't talk about, we are happy to answer any questions. And don't be shy about reaching out and getting in touch and saying, hey, I'm thinking about going to this place, or I've got this concern. We're happy to talk.
And I touched on this before. I'm not a particularly adventurous or risk-taking person. And I kind of feel like if I can do this, anybody can do this. I just had a lot of misconceptions about what it is and what the world is. And traveling for 5 years, I've realized, I was almost completely wrong in every respect. So I do think, again, I don't want to encourage people to do this because I think it's great. I don't want everybody to do it. But I think more people could do it than think they could. And I think it's awesome.
Yeah, you probably hit it on the head, because I, as one, would be scared to do something like that. But probably if I got myself to do it, I would really enjoy it.
I'm sure you would.
So thank you, guys. And thanks for coming. And we will talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast and consider making a donation by clicking the coffee cup on any page at www.wheredogaysretire.com. Each cup of coffee that you buy costs $5 and goes towards helping us continue the podcast. Thank you for your continued support.